All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So, what is happening, and we'll get into the agenda here in just a second, but just a real quick overview of what's happened, since Broadcom completed its acquisition of VMware back in fall toward the end of 2023. Obviously the big thing, and a lot of what people already know about, is the shift to the subscription model away from perpetual licensing. And for a long time leading up to the completion of Broadcom's acquisition of VMware, that seemed to be the prevailing sense of what was going to change and what was going to be the biggest thing that you had to deal with with regard to what was going to change. But Broadcom has changed a lot more than just simply canceling out perpetual licensing and moving to a subscription model. There's really been more of an overall transformation of their go-to-market strategy and how they're packaging the products. So yes, there still is the understanding the change of the perpetual to subscription model licensing, but there's also being educated and understanding really how beyond that licensing model you're going to be consuming VMware with regards to how the products are packaged together now. So really, again, as far as what's happening, there's more to it than just a licensing change. There's also changes to partner programs. I will call out to upfront that MavenSpire is. There was a lot of confusion about what the partner community was going to look like, who was still going to be a VMware partner. MavenSpire is officially a Broadcom by VMware partner, so we are a part of the new VMware partner program. You'll see as we go through this presentation, it's I know a lot of it's been kind of perceived as bad news, but it's not all bad news. So there's some importance in understanding, how you can be a little bit more agile and how you're consuming your VMware licensing and addressing your virtualization needs overall, both on-prem and in the cloud, and just understanding how they're aligning the ecosystem around really making it real, and making it a little bit easier to understand, use, and really leverage some of the additional features and functionalities in the VMware universe that frankly were underutilized before. So quickly, just reviewing the agenda, there's really 3 sections of this that I'm going to go through. And I'm going to start not with the licensing stuff, but I'm going to start with going through and helping you understand a little bit more about how they've simplified the offerings and really what's on the menu and how you consume it with regards to and comparing it to the old world of VMware. The second section, I'll get into the licensing model transformation, and that's where we'll dig a little bit deeper on what does it mean, how do you scope, how do you size the differences between the old perpetual licensing model and the new subscription model. And then in the third section and the final section, I'm going to go through a little bit more detail on the economics. And this is more that part of it will be more focused on, how do you have the discussion with financial decision makers in your organization to help everyone kind of understand, in this new world, to make sure that things aren't perceived as a higher cost or lower cost. And it could come out either way, frankly. We've been working through a lot of this with our own individual clients. And in some situations it's advantageous, in some situations it's been a little bit more expensive. So I know that a lot of the FUD out there is making everybody think that automatically they're going to be paying more for VMware. That's sometimes true, sometimes not. So it's really, it's custom. It's based off of each individual environment and your needs. So we'll get into these 3 sections. Without further ado, I will jump into the simplified offerings. Any questions, general questions, before I jump into this part of it? All set? Good to go. Okay, so let's talk about the simplified portfolio. If you're familiar with and have consumed VMware in the past, you've probably been walked through over the years different suites, different individual products and bundles. To put it simply, there were 168 different SKUs that represented different products, different bundles, different editions of those bundles and products. A lot of the, most of what you consumed started with what version of vSphere are you going to be on with your platform. Obviously, you had to worry about vCenter licensing, and then there was just a whole suite of additional add-on products that you could kind of piece and part into the solution. But it could be pretty confusing at times to kind of figure out what were the limitations of the different bundles, suites, so on and so forth. And could be quite a mess to kind of figure out what's right and then actually get the right thing, quoted, consumed, and deployed. There's a pretty big transformation and simplification of the product offerings now, where they're taking all of those 168 disparate ways of consuming different parts of VMware, and they're really breaking it down into 4 primary offerings. Two of those are represented on this slide here, and we'll jump into more deep dive or detailed views of this in the next few slides. But you'll see a lot of what VMware is bringing to market now through Broadcom is going to be very much focused on VMware Cloud Foundation and VMware vSphere Foundation. And we'll get into the why one or the other is the right fit. And there still are 2 more foundational offerings for smaller environments, and we'll talk about those a little bit as well. But a lot of this that we'll get into, you'll see that they're taking a lot of those advanced features that before you had to individually license and kind of consume into the minutia of whatever all you had enabled in your VMware environment, and making it a little bit more simple, where they're bundling a lot of those features into these as foundational products. And there still are some add-on options and services, and again, we'll get into that in the next few slides. So kind of looking at it high level, these are really the 4 offerings. Again, the 2 on the top of the slide you see here are the primary. vSphere Foundation. vSphere Foundation, think of that as the most straightforward comparison to what would have been Enterprise Plus in the past. Enterprise Plus kind of became the most consumed version of VMware licensing over, I would say, the last, 8 to 10 years. So the most common. So vSphere Foundation is kind of where you start to look at a situation where, what does it make sense to transition into if I'm just a straightforward, I was a vSphere Enterprise Plus customer. I wasn't really using a lot of bells and whistles beyond that. vSphere Foundation is probably what's going to be right for you from a features and functionality comparison. And then you've got VMware Cloud Foundation, and we'll jump into this a little bit deeper in the next slide as to what all is included in VMware Cloud Foundation. But VMware Cloud Foundation, that terminology is not new, but this bundle and how they're packaging it is new. And this is basically taking all of the extra bells and whistles that VMware brought to market to basically enhance, automate, add a little bit of AI into the environment, and really strategically balance your environment and manage your workloads. A lot of that tooling is now a part of that subscription versus them, trying to sell it to you in bits and pieces across, again, an endless number of SKUs. You'll see on the bottom of the slide here, these are the 2 additional offerings. These are for the smaller environments. So you might be thinking, if you were an Essentials Plus customer, or one of the smaller foundational type bundle offerings, where you could get a lower priced version of VMware that specifically fit into like a 3 or 4 node VMware cluster type environment, but you were, because you were getting the cost savings, you were limited to a certain number of hosts in those bundles. They still are offering, keeping some of those entry-level offerings around that look and feel very similar to that. You'll see when we get into the how these things are modeled out and licensed, where those new bumpers or limitations are as far as the smaller environments. It used to be by host, now it'll be by core. But we'll get into that when we get into the licensing section of this. Taking a little bit deeper look, peeling the covers back a little bit for VMware vSphere Foundation and Cloud Foundation. So as I alluded to on the previous slide, you can look at here and see it with vSphere Foundation. And again, that's the one that I said was the closest comparison to vSphere Enterprise Plus. You're still getting obviously your basic vSphere licensing, but additionally, you get ARIA Suite Standard as well as some vSAN functionality. If you're not familiar with vSAN, which you probably are, if you're on a platform like Dell's VxRail platform, or if you're just using a pre-architected, pre-engineered vSAN ready node type deployment, then you're probably familiar with vSAN licensing. Again, used to be licensed separately, but now at the very least you do get that as a base part of the vSphere Foundation package. And then you have ARIA Suite Standard in there, which gives you a little bit more insight into what's going on in the environment. So you've got more of an operations platform where you can do some basic policy management, performance monitoring and analytics, capacity management, application dependency mapping. So ARIA Suite Standard, in the old world, they called that VRealize. ARIA Suite branding came along, I want to say sometime in the past year and a half. And so they've slowly transitioned. So that's what they would have referred to as VRealize in the past. So ARIA Suite Standard gives you that basic entry level version of VRealize. VMware Cloud Foundation, you can see obviously comes with a lot more bundled into it. And this is going to be more in that classic world of VCF, where you've got, probably multiple larger clusters. Some could be on-prem, some could be in the cloud. That's the other thing nice here is that you've got the license portability to be able to move that to whatever premise it needs to be moved to handle your workloads. The biggest thing here is you'll see that the vSAN licensing, and we'll jump into this when we get into the licensing section a little bit more, but the vSAN licensing is higher capacity per core as your baseline, just because in a VCF environment, it's assumed that you're utilizing vSAN. You go up to ARIA Suite Enterprise. This is above and beyond ARIA Suite Standard. Adds in a little bit more of the automation and artificial intelligence into the environment, where you can do some enhanced workload balancing and predictive capacity management, as well as some additional integrated security and compliance features. And then you've got NSX. If you're familiar with NSX, that's network virtualization, where you can do some automation and microsegmentation of the virtual networking. And then SDDC, Software Defined Data Center Manager, SDDC Manager, is a part of that as well, where you can manage the physical and virtual infrastructure, some additional health monitoring and managing across workload domains. You'll see at the bottom of the slide here, the advanced services add-ons. I alluded to this a little bit before. When you hit any of the limitations of what your core license subscription contains, whether that be vSAN capacity, or you want to add on some of the additional features like virtual firewall or load balancing. If you're doing anything with Kubernetes and need to have Tanzu added into the environment, those are add-on licenses. And I'll give you an example as we get into the next section around the licensing model transformation, on specifically like where you would hit the vSAN limit and have to add more to the subscription. The good news is here, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the model transformation, but is being able to adjust, based on your needs, being able to kind of turn up and turn down the features and functionalities. And because it's a subscription and it's not perpetual licensing, it's not buy it once and you're stuck with what you bought. It's a subscription, so you can adjust and bring things up or down, in or out, based on your needs. That is the end of the section around the product transformation. Any questions about that before I jump into how do you license this? How do you figure out what you need? Any questions in the chat? All clear?
All clear.
Curry's muted, but I can read your lips.
All clear.
All clear. Good to go. So let's talk about the licensing model transformation. And these slides will still have some of the feature set of each one, but we're going to start with VMware Cloud Foundation around how it's packaged now or how it's licensed now. And again, in the past, again, perpetual, you purchased whatever perpetual licenses you needed. It was based off typically a socket count, and then you made a choice on your SNS support. Am I going to do 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years? All right, and so you would have that upfront cost of buying your perpetual license, and then a yearly or every 3-year cost of renewing your SNS production support subscriptions. So in the new subscription world, other than the fact that it's moving from perpetually owned licenses to subscription model licenses, the way it's sized is based off of per core pricing. In the past, perpetual was tied to sockets, subscription is tied to core. So a basic example of that would be if you had, and I'll just use a single node as an example to keep it easy. If you had a 2U server that was 2 sockets, 20 cores per socket, in the past, you would buy 2 sockets worth of vSphere Enterprise Plus licensing and whatever SNS support subscription you chose based off of it being a 2 socket model. In the new world, that one host with 2 sockets, 20 cores per socket, it would be 40 cores of licensing for VMware Cloud Foundation, vSphere Cloud Foundation, whatever the case. So everything is calculated per core. As far as your subscription terms, you can do a 1 year, a 3 year, or a 5 year subscription. We've seen the sweet spot pretty much starts from a pricing perspective, just being transparent at about the 3 year mark. Just in our experience so far, we have not seen Broadcom really apply any special discounting or incentives around 1 year subscriptions. But once you get to a 3 or a 5 year, they will start to make some additional concessions and some additional incentives when you get to those 3 and 5 year term marks. The vSAN part of this, as far as how much vSAN capacity you're using, again, is tied to cores. In the VMware Cloud Foundation bundle, you are getting 1 TB of vSAN capacity per core. If that ends up taking care of all, let's say you've got a 4-node cluster and, you've got, I don't know, let's say your licensing adds up to 45 terabytes of raw capacity for vSAN licensing, and your core subscription based off of your core count that you're paying for covers that, that's fine. If you are a little bit more storage heavy across those vSAN nodes, you might run into a situation where you do have to add on additional vSAN licensing, again, per TB tied to the cores. The VCF version of this is pretty much the same. Obviously, it's just a change in your base licenses. There is one big difference here in that the vSAN capacity, when you go with vSphere Foundation, is 100 gigabytes per core instead of 1 TB per core. So you don't get as much capacity licensing for vSAN in the vSphere Foundation base subscription as you do in vSphere Foundation. So you are in this world a little bit more susceptible to potentially needing to additionally license vSAN capacity, which I've got on the next slide. And so these are just add-ons, and it's per TB. And so you literally just, let's say you had, and again, I'll use the example of like 45, let's say you had 45 TB of raw storage rights within whatever you have licensed with either VCF or VSF, but you actually had 50 or 60 raw, right? You'd be with that license, you'd be limited to that 45 TB, but you would come back and basically add additional vSAN licensing rights to your subscription to make up for that gap between the 45 and 60 some odd that you actually have the capability of having in your vSAN environment. So in some cases, transparently, and this goes back to some of the experiences that we've been having working directly with our clients over the last few months, we had a handful of clients that have either had some net new installations or had support on perpetual licensing that was coming to an end and actually needed to go ahead and make the transition into the new world. We've seen in both looking at VSF and VCF that a lot of times, if it's based off of a larger vSAN capacity environment, it'll make sense to go ahead and go with VCF, even though it is, quote unquote, the more expensive version. It can actually end up being the less expensive version for larger environments because of the amount of vSAN capacity you get per core in that bundle versus the VSF or vSphere Foundation version. I hope that makes sense. I know that was a word salad, but again, we can definitely come back and address any Q&A here at the end as well. That's the basic overview of the licensing model. Now let's talk a little bit about the economics. So what does it cost? This gives you, and this is retail pricing. I made some comments a little while ago around, what we've seen with regards to Broadcom and their willingness to offer additional incentives, and we're seeing that happen more and more. So just understand that this slide is just showing you list price, street price, retail price, whatever you want to call it. So starting at the top, VMware Cloud Foundation, again, license per core, and again, the list price on that is about $350 per core for the subscription, and this is the example of a 3-year subscription. vSphere Foundation is list price $135 per core, and then again, we were just talking about the maybe needed requirement of having to add additional vSAN capacity. If you are in a situation where your base subscription doesn't cover your full vSAN physical capacity that you could be utilizing and you want to get that licensed, it's about $210 per TB, and again, list price. I can't overemphasize this enough. I won't go into some of these extras. Some of these extras are features like virtual firewall or firewall with advanced threat detection. These are appliances that you can, again, purchase, and it's based on per core. If you need to size that out, we can kind of figure out what all features and functionality you're going to use with the virtual firewall to figure out, what does it make sense based on the size of your environment, how many cores would that appliance really need to be to figure out how much the cost of that would be. So pretty straightforward. And again, this is list price. We're seeing some examples especially in the 3 and 5 year type subscriptions, and more specifically for people who are in that process of being at the end of their SNS support for their old perpetual licensing and needing to make this transition. We are seeing some additional incentives applied out there. Real quick representation of the 2 more entry-level versions of vSphere that are still around that I alluded to earlier. vSphere Standard and vSphere Essentials Plus. These are licensed as 96 core bundles. Again, in the old days, you might have seen these more entry-level products be tied to 3 or 4 maximum ESXi hosts. Now it is just tied to cores like everything else is within their licensing model of the subscriptions now. So it's up to 96 cores if you do a vSphere Standard, and then it's up to 96 core kit for vSphere Essentials. 3-year subscriptions of these are very comparable, and I believe actually a little bit lower cost than their old perpetual versions would have cost on a 3-year subscription. And then, when you think about this, and I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. I will say, don't get too wrapped up in the numbers. This was just meant to be a visual representation about, how do you have this conversation with the financial decision makers within your organization, because it can be a tough conversation. Again, going back to some of the FUD that's out there, and some of it's real, some of it's not. But when you look at it, some people will think, well, I already owned my perpetual licensing. All I was having to pay for was support, and that wasn't as expensive as what I paid for the original licensing. You kind of have to zoom out a little bit and take a more high-level view of it, of what the total cost of ownership of that VMware licensing has been in the past. And so anytime you have been in a situation in the past where you were bringing in a new cluster, needed to get new licensing for that cluster, right? You had an initial higher upfront cost of licensing that cluster or that node. And so you were buying perpetual licensing to get enabled up front, plus whatever SNS support contract you were choosing, either a 1 or a 3 or a 5 year. If you did a 1 year, you were coming back and doing a renewal. This is an example of if you were doing the SNS renewals. I'm sorry, if you were buying perpetual licensing with 3 years SNS support up front, the cost being roughly $7,000. In the new world of the subscription model, this is a VSF versus the old vSphere Enterprise Plus perpetual licensing model. You can see that the overall total cost of ownership over that 3-year period, and this is an example of a single host. In this scenario, your total 3-year cost is roughly the same. It's actually a little bit lower in this example that they used with the 3-year subscription on VSF. But this is how to have the conversation: is looking at, okay, let's not look at what we're paying yearly versus upfront. Let's look at it all together over a 3-year, 5-year span. What is the total cost comparison between the old model and the new model? The old model is not an option anymore, so you don't have a choice. I only put this out there to say, the Band-Aid ripoff isn't as bad as everybody thought it was going to be when you look at it over the course of a 3-year or 5 years. In some cases, the subscription may actually cost you less over that 3 to 5 year span than what it was costing you in the old model. In the old model, you were paying a much higher amount of that up front. And so, thinking about it, looking at it through the lens of trying to get financial decision makers bought into this, you really, you climbed and you got to the peak of that mountain and got those approvals back in the initial acquisition. And then it made it easier down the road because the support renewals were much lower cost than that initial upfront cost of the perpetual license, to where it didn't, you'd kind of gotten past the mountain of the high cost, where now it's more spread out, right? It's more split, more flat across a 3-year or a 5-year comparison, where instead of paying a large upfront cost with lower support over the course of 3 to 5 years, it's just spreading it out and you're paying roughly the same amount on a yearly basis. And that could go up or down based off of you having new needs, expanding, you're growing your environment, adding additional features, so on and so forth. Any questions on that?
Matt has a question.
Go ahead, Matt.
Just more of a financial question for any customers that may be through procurement or whatever reasons may be pigeonholed. Do they have the ability to say, take the subscription model, but pay for it like it's a perpetual? So for example, I'd take each one of those, I'd cut you a check for all of them in year 1, and is there any incentive for them to do that? Do they have the ability to do it, or do they have to cut a check every single year for the licensing?
Yeah, some of that is still in the works. So
Okay.
as of right now, and again, this is just based off of, like, Curry and I are working this with multiple clients with Broadcom over the past few months. Right now, it's pretty straightforward with regards to, you either pay you pay up front for 1 year, 3-year, or 5-year subscription. But they do offer the ability. So if you want to go year to year, you do the 1-year subscription, right?
Okay.
Gotcha. That's the least amount of term. So if you want to, like the slide example, if you want to smooth it out like that, then you just go year to year. I will say again, we're seeing them offer more like, hey, if if they'll go for a 3-year or a 5-year, we can get X amount more % off and save them some money. Total cost of ownership story gets a little bit better in those situations. They are, and they haven't finalized this, but we're hearing from Broadcom that there are going to be some flexible payment options coming down the pike, where they're going to offer, if you're familiar with Dell Apex, more of a consumption model that's similar to like an Apex type offering.
Nice.
And so there are some things in the works. We're kind of in a, and this is another thing to note, is Broadcom is still going through their transition period, bringing VMware into the fold. It's kind of interesting because a lot of times our Broadcom counterparts are kind of trying to hold back a little bit and delay putting offers out until the beginning of May. To pull back the curtain a little bit on that, they are internally going through a transition in their CRM. And so right now they're still operating on the old VMware CRM tools, and they're transitioning or being cut over to the new Broadcom CRM tools. The first week of May, I believe, is when the cutover is supposed to happen. And we're being told because of that they won't really be able to be fully enabled for being more creative in their license, in their pricing and payment type models until that happens. And so right now, as we're in this in-between period where we are seeing some additional incentives, and it's very straightforward. You either do 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and go about your merry way. But we're anticipating that there's going to be that first week of May, we're going to see them be much more aggressive in how they position it and offering some more creative payment models. That was pretty long-winded, but I hope it answered your question.
It does. It's just, some people, if they're used to one, they just, it looks like perpetual, but it's really subscription. How they pay for it. And sometimes it might be easier for a department that says we've got to create a bridge until whatever they figure out. So we're going to pretend like it's perpetual and pay for it like it's perpetual, even though the model's changed.
Yeah. That makes sense. Real quick call to action before we wrap up, and we will spend we'll hang out as long as we want, as you all need, if there's any additional questions. But really, the biggest call to action is first knowing and understanding where your current perpetual licensing and, more importantly, your SNS support is and when it expires. Understand Broadcom has completely shut down the ability to extend your SNS support on the old perpetual licensing. So if you currently have active SNS support on perpetual licensing through X date, you definitely need to know what that date is, because once you reach, and I'll just use example dates, let's just say that your current SNS support was expiring July 15th of this year. You will not be able to extend your VMware production support on those perpetual licensing beyond then. They will not offer it. You will have to move into a subscription-based new subscription in order to move forward with production support. Now, does that mean they're going to turn off your environment? No, absolutely not. You still own your perpetual licensing. You can still continue to use it. You just can't get SNS support on it anymore after your next expiration date. You might be thinking, well, fine, I'll just keep going down that route. Just understand, once you don't have SNS support, they're going to be turning off your ability to upgrade and patch. So when the latest, vSphere 9 comes out, you won't be able to upgrade to it, or critical patch for a new CVE has come out. You won't be able to get access to it if you don't have SNS support. So it's risky. So again, the biggest call to action here is know your current status, understand when your current SNS supports are expiring. We talked about it, but I think having the conversation with decision makers, specifically financial decision makers within your organization, about how to budget for VMware. You probably have, I'm sure you all have a line item budget every year for what it costs for VMware. In the past, you were probably just budgeting what it would cost to do an SNS renewal for your support. You've got to adjust and have that conversation on, okay, hey, this is going to change into the subscription model, and what does that mean budgetarily as we plan for years going forward. And then understanding what fits the needs in this new world. Again, that goes back to the bundles. Most importantly, my biggest call out here is, and I mentioned this back at the beginning, we are a VMware by Broadcom channel partner. We can help you go through this journey. We can assess your environment at no cost. We have tools that of our own. We've got tools that Broadcom uses to enable its partners to very quickly assess the needs of your environment and figure out what subscription model licensing looks like in your environment. So there's a pretty easy and basic script that we can have you run in PowerCLI to pull up and give us a full core count and vSAN capacity and all those things in your existing environment to start giving you some examples of what that new subscription world could look like for you with the different options, and make sure that we do it in a way that makes the right choice for you, price and performance considered, along with the features and functionality that you need that are right for your environment. So we can get this appropriately sized and get the right subscriptions identified and quoted out for you. Beyond that, again, open to questions. We encourage questions. I hope this has been useful information. We will continue. I mentioned that there's still some transformation and change that's going on, throughout the next month or so on the Broadcom side as they get more towards fully integrating VMware in. So we'll definitely be doing some follow-up to this. But again, I invite you, if you need help with this, we're here to help as a Broadcom channel partner.